The Empire's single digits are finally revealing their terrifying power. Gabil and the others survive by the skin of their teeth, but just as the dust settles, Velgrynd the Flame Dragon shatters all common sense. An entire Imperial airship fleet warped directly to the battlefield. AI Anime and Manga presents. If you're excited to see how our forces handle this impossible threat, please hit that like button. Drop a comment with your predictions, and subscribe to the channel. And a huge thank you to our YouTube members, who get early access to upcoming episodes and help support the AI narration, subtitles, thumbnails, and rendering for every chapter. Now, let's head back to the front lines, where Gabil's reckless courage is about to meet a true monster. Gabil launched his battlefield challenge with a roar.
I am Gabil the Dracolord! Prepare to fight!
With that shout, Gabil sized up the enemy and charged ahead, leaving the rest of his forces behind. It made him a total failure of a commander, but at the same time it was not necessarily a tactical mistake. The strength of his chosen enemy, after all, was truly outstanding. He was a kind-looking man in glasses, not really standing out from the group, and yet Gabil called him out without the slightest hesitation. Gabil thrust his lance toward the man.
I want you! Yes, you! I hereby order you to take me on!
The bespectacled man's lips twisted into a sneer. Marco answered him. Well, great. I was trying to act like an ordinary intelligence officer, but I suppose you noticed what I'm capable of. The man removed his glasses as he spoke. The moment he did, his entire atmosphere changed. Marco continued, all trace of shyness gone. Very well then, I will take you on. But before that, will everyone around me please move a safe distance away? He was ordering his own allies. His bewildered companions did not get the message. One of them shouted, Whoa, Marco! You're not cut out for fighting at all. Another added, Yeah, quit trying to act tough. You know any of us could kick your ass. The man called Marco smiled at his concerned comrades. Marco let the disguise fall. Well, it was a real comfortable place to work, but that was just a front. I'm actually part of the single digits, number 8 to be exact. You understand what that means, don't you? Looking at this suddenly changed man, everyone realized that good old Marco was actually in disguise the whole time. They also instantly realized that he had the authority to hand them orders. Orders like the one he gave them a moment ago. One soldier snapped to attention. Right away, sir! Another called back. Good luck! Marco's companions scattered. With a sigh of relief, he turned his squinting serpentine eyes toward Gabil. He too had seen Gabil's strengths for what they were. In this world, attempting to challenge a truly outstanding fighter with overwhelming numbers was usually meaningless. Marco, well aware of that, shooed the rest of the group away from himself, even though some of them were Imperial Knight-level talents. Marco sized him up. You were Gabil then? Well, thanks a lot for taking my job away from me. You'll pay for that with your life, you know.
Sir Rimuru mentioned the single digits to me. He said that even he considered them dangerous, as I recall. But now I've been blessed with the opportunity to deal with one all by myself.
Gabil sounded overjoyed, and with that, the battle between two great heroes began. Behind Marco's plain exterior lay a skill that made him far more dangerous than he looked. Marco was best described as a man whose main feature was his total lack of features. He had joined the Imperial Guardians about 800 years ago, his unique skill adapter attracting the attention of then Guardian leader Damrata for its potential as an infiltration skill. Adapter offered Marco the notable ability to disguise himself to look exactly like anybody he saw. This was not like copy, part of Hinata's unique skill usurper. Rather, it was the ability to mimic an exact duplicate of a given person. Only so much could be imitated. If the target was someone who far exceeded him in strength, it was not possible to duplicate all of that. Still, the more powerful the people he encountered, the more general-purpose strength the experience would grant him. That was how Marco survived the ordeal for awakening himself as a saint, and how he eventually rose to the single digits. Now he had been part of the Imperial Guardians for about 100 years. It was precisely because of this skill that Marco could not shake the awe he felt for Kondo. Even if Kondo was a visitor from another world possessing a soul more powerful than most, his strength was still ponderously difficult to comprehend. Marco was actually the first person Kondo challenged to a ranking duel, giving him a glimpse at his extraordinary strength. Marco assumed he received special treatment due to being a favorite of the Emperor, but he quickly learned that he was wrong. Kondo's strength was impossible to employ adapter on despite his saint-level fighting ability, and that was how Kondo easily defeated the top ranks to become leader of the group. Even the 4 knights, all freaks of nature in Marco's eyes, were defeated by Kondo without a second thought. That was why Marco practically worshipped the ground Kondo walked on. He even followed Kondo's example of sticking to his rank of lieutenant, serving as a similarly rank-and-file second lieutenant in the Empire. He served the Imperial Intelligence Bureau mainly so he could serve as Kondo's fixer. Right now, he faced a formidable enemy in the form of Gabil. He fought him back with a spear of his own, but he quickly understood that he could not win the battle as it stood, so he decided to change himself into the form of the person he believed was strongest of all. Moving a distance away from Gabil, Marco transformed into Kondo. The ultimate enchantment alternative, a gift lent to him by the Emperor, allowed him to use adapter with even more precision than usual. Marco thus had strength and abilities similar to Kondo's own now.
How strange. Is that your true form?
Marco replied while posing as Kondo. No, this is me imitating the man I believe is the strongest in the world. The 4 knights were strong as well, but they couldn't hold a candle to Lieutenant Kondo. In fact, Marco took a glance at the battlefield unfolding next to him. Then he finished the thought. Even King Gazel, the renowned champion, was no match for him, was he? Gabil groaned at this. His magic sense skill operated in a wide range now, and thanks to that, he knew all of it. His allies were not faring well. Hakuro was out of the battle, and as Marco pointed out, King Gazel was struggling too.
It appears so.
Marco continued in that borrowed presence. The moment Lieutenant Kondo went into combat, there was no doubt as to who'd win. That's why I didn't want to reveal my full skills to anyone around here. You never know who might leak word out, and it's better to keep your powers hidden anyway, isn't it? With that casual comment, Marco transformed his weapon from a spear to a military sword. This was a legend-class weapon lent to him for the moment, and Marco could change its shape to anything he wanted. He readied the sword as Kondo would, striking just as majestic in appearance. Gabil, meanwhile, held up his vortex spear, a magical weapon that was now the treasure of all lizardmen. His father Abil entrusted it to him, and it now felt familiar in his hands. He had used it in many fierce battles, and whenever it was damaged, Kurobi's able hands fixed it up for him. Its capabilities were unique in nature, but it was also a stout ally to Gabil, one he cared a great deal for. Still, it was no legend. And given that differences in weapon performance can often determine victory or defeat, Gabil was at an overwhelming disadvantage. But Gabil also had the dragon skin ability, and that brought his equipment closer to God class. As he saw it, Marco was at the level of a saint, equal in strength to his awakened self, and so he spared no effort from the very beginning. Gabil wondered whether this man could truly penetrate his defense. He was pretty confident in his defensive abilities. You could not win a battle unless you inflicted decisive damage on your opponent. This was not boxing. No matter how many blows you landed, if they were not fatal, it was all for nothing. Gabil did not think Marco's weapon was enough to break through his own defenses, but he was not about to let his guard down either. Carefully, he watched his opponent's moves. Marco announced his attack. Here I go.
Yes, come to me!
Gabil's misfortune was that he entered into hostilities with Marco too soon. When he was awakened, his power was enormous, but he had yet to fully master it. Just as Ultima feared, even in this pre-evolutionary stage, he was not fully capable of handling his magicule count. Whether there was great power in his hands or not, he could not use it to its fullest extent. He boasted extraordinary defense and healing, and that alone made him very strong. But he picked the wrong opponent this time. Marco began the technique. Baika Goka Totsu.
Vortex Crash!
Gabil survived only because of his careful response. In terms of strength, they were an even match. Gabil perhaps just a touch superior. But in terms of skill level, Marco's perfect imitation of Kondo made him far more powerful. Marco could not produce even 80% of Kondo's actual abilities. He could not simulate his ultimate skill Sandalphon, and if he was paired against Gazel, he would be doomed. This bare-bones version of Kondo was on more of an even footing with Gabil, and between that and his defenses, Gabil should have been assured of victory. But sometimes the element of luck comes into play. Marco looked like the overwhelming victor, but his victory was a close call. Marco muttered to himself as he watched Gabil collapse on the ground. Boy, I sure can't laugh at Major General Faraga now. Gabil the Dracolord, eh? No wonder he mistook him for Veldora. At this moment, Gabil's fate was about to reach its end. Sokka's cry cut across the battlefield. My brother! Just then, a figure stood before Marco as if protecting Gabil. It was Sokka, whose force had just rushed into the scene. Gabil's own troops were there as well. One of the troops shouted, "Lord Gabil!" Another cried, "Please don't die, Gabil!" A third shouted, "No! Lord Gabil should never die in a place like this." They knew they could not defeat Marco, but still they dared to stand up to him. And it was that courage that saved Gabil's life. Individually, none of them were as good as the saint-level Marco, but all of them still earned a special A rank. They dove into their stores of healing potions, desperately trying to buy as much time as possible. But Marco's technique, modeled after Kondo's, let him destroy enemies from the inside with the fighting spirit he infused in them. The skill essentially nullified the effects of potions, and it meant Sokka's force had to be prepared to die for the cause. One by one, Gabil's troops began to fall. Now it was Nanso, part of Sokka's force, who was lying unconscious. The skill difference was not that great, but the strength difference was. Even worse, Marco's weapon was legend class. It was simply too insurmountable an advantage, and so the casualties gradually continued to rise. Fortunately, none of them died. Gabil's evolution under Rimuru had made everyone under him stronger as well. That provided a boost to their endurance, and thanks to that, they just barely escaped a final exit. The ongoing effects of Marco's attacks, however, meant they were out of the battle. At this rate, they were likely to be massacred before long, so Gabil spoke up.
Enough! Enough, all of you! It is time to run! Sokka, this is an order! Take everyone with you and leave here at once!
He desperately tried lifting himself up as he looked towards Sokka. She did not even look back at him as she sneered. Sokka refused him. I refuse, my brother. I serve Sir Soe, not you. I am under no obligation to heed your orders.
What are you saying?
Sokka raised her voice. Besides, if we run away at this point, that is guaranteed to produce deaths within our ranks. You among them, brother. The normally calm Sokka screamed out, not caring how it looked. This confused the speechless Gabil.
What are you talking about? It is the role of any commander to keep casualties as low as possible, even if by a little. Isn't it your job to abandon the defeated and make sure that as many of us as possible survive?
Gabil struggled to even get off the ground now. He could barely continue speaking as he watched his comrades fight on. But Sokka dismissed his words. Sokka answered, "Then my plan is the right one. None of us are weak enough to be killed by a single blow. This is how we are buying time." They would continue to fight, not caring if their friends fell. They would use their numbers to harass Marco, being careful to take as little damage as possible from him. That was Sokka's plan, the way they'd search for a chance at victory.
That's nonsense! There's no guarantee that rescue will ever come.
Now that Rimuru and his other top officers were on their way to the Imperial capital, they could not expect any support from them. And even if the currently evolving ones woke up from their slumber, none of them would be rushing to the rescue right this moment. They could count on the three demonesses, but they were currently dealing with Velgrynd, an even more powerful enemy. They were the ones who needed support right now. There was no way they could ask them for help. Gabil understood this well, and so he issued the order to retreat. But his troops defied him. One soldier shouted, "No, Gabil, it's you. You're the one we've been waiting for." Another called to him, "Yes, Sir Gabil. Get those injuries healed and rise back to your feet." A third added, "Indeed. We will buy you time as we await your revival, Sir Gabil. There is no other way to save everyone here." Gabil suddenly grew ashamed of himself. Was he the only one, he wondered, who had given up on victory?
What have I done? Very well then. Hold your own until I stand back up, even if you must do it on willpower alone.
He shouted it out, knowing full well how reckless it sounded. Hot tears spilled from his eyes, eloquently illustrating his emotional state. The goddess of victory will never abandon those who do not give up. Now another pair responded to his call. Velgrynd announced himself. "Hoo boy, you're as reckless as ever, aren't you? If so, let me lend you a hand." Zonda followed with the real explanation. "The young lady has given me an order. She told me to not let Sir Gabil down, for he is an important plaything to her. So here I am." Ultima's servants, Velgrynd and Zonda, had arrived on the scene at some point. Zonda muttered that survival was going to be a lot harder than death, but the battlefield was now too loud for Gabil to make it out, fortunately for him. Velgrynd stood to the side of Sokka, ever the faithful butler. Then he raised his staff up toward Marco. Velgrynd gave the order. "I will fight him, Lady Sokka, so please back me up. Zonda will aid you with healing duties, and so we'd like the rest of you to protect the wounded." Sokka answered at once. "Yes, sir," Velgrynd began. "Let us begin then." As soon as Sokka responded, Velgrynd went on the move. He was a demon peer and marquis back in his own realm, and while his energy stores were less than a quarter the size of Marco's, he exceeded him in skill level. It may not be enough to win, but it would certainly be enough to irritate his foe. Marco clicked his tongue. "Why must you all annoy me so? You just keep coming in one after the other before I can finish any of you off." Velgrynd replied unruffled. "Of course, it is our mission to gauge the strength of our enemy as well." Marco's frustration sharpened. "Great! It's so frustrating, isn't it, when people try to copy our own core strength? I'm going to take you out, and then I'm going to take out that nasty-looking Sokka cut-in. Got you!" As he fought back against Velgrynd, Marco turned his murderous gaze upon the downed Gabil. It was a momentary opening, but not one that Sokka would miss. She spoke up on purpose, hoping to draw attention to herself and bring Marco further astray. If her kunai reached him, then good. If not, she figured, Velgryn's blade would stab him instead. Marco saw this coming, and so he made the best choice possible. In essence, he decided to expose himself to Sokka's kunai instead of avoiding it. It was the correct answer too, because any reaction he'd make against Sokka would only allow Velgrynd to more seriously wound him. Continuing to ignore Sokka, Marco parried Velgryn's staff away, reminding himself of the perils of letting his mind drift during battle. Inwardly, he decided he would finish Gabil off once he beat these two. They were just so nasty. There was no doubting that Gabil was the most dangerous out of them all. That was why Marco wanted to finish him off quickly. Instead, he got greedy, and now he had a stab wound to show for it. It was not anything too serious, but simply letting himself get hurt while taking the form of his beloved Kondo was unforgivable. Marco reset his target. "Let's get rid of you two first," Velgrynd asked him. "Do you think that you can then?" Sokka added. "I hope you're not being a sore loser, Sir Velgrynd." Velgrynd gave a dry little answer. "Perhaps I am, but no need to hurry. Let's do our job." Thus, Velgrynd and Sokka formed a tag team against Marco, fighting on despite the odds. Zonda was on the move as well. Zonda diagnosed the wounds aloud. "This is quite tricky, isn't it? You're using aura, or fighting spirit, aren't you, since you're human, to leave your energy inside your opponent, as if emitting magical dispelling waves. Truly a frightening technique, and since we are spiritual life forms, it will work on all of us." That was how he diagnosed Gabil's injuries, and he was absolutely right. As with Demrada's spiral penetrator, it was an explosive type of force, a wave of concentrated fighting force that destroyed an enemy from the inside. It was the ultimate form of Oboro Shinmei Ryu, or Battle Will as it would be called here, and it functioned as a sword honed for dispelling evil. That was why no healing potion that worked using magicules could handle its wounds. But Zonda could heal them. Skillfully manipulating the magicules, he could adjust them to soothe the disturbed spiritual force, neutralizing the fighting force Marco implanted inside and restoring the normal flow of spirit within Gabil's body. Gabil, too, was not just lying there and waiting to recover. He intensely hoped for greater healing power than before, and that wish was about to manifest a new ability within him. And yet, even in this most unpredictable of situations, Marco did something even more unexpected. He stood up straight, going out of his fighting stance. Marco announced his withdrawal. Well, great. I'm out of time. I've received the order to return, so I suppose we'll have to save this for next time. As soon as Marco made that statement, he teleported himself out of there before awaiting a reply. Somehow, Gabil and his crew found a way to survive. Elsewhere on the battlefield, survival was the best anyone could manage. Vaughn was struggling against Footman, or perhaps struggling was too polite a way to put it. He was enlightened himself and confident enough in his powers, but Footman had a magicule count large enough to easily overwhelm him. Vaughn might have had a legend-class suit of armor and war lance, which no doubt contributed to the bottom line for him, but his foe still seemed so distressingly out of reach. The only reason why he was still in this fight was because Footman had lost all rational thought. That, and Phobio's contribution, was a big part of it. Phobio burst in with his own introduction. Phobio, the Black Leopard Fang, is here to help. At first, Vaughn was suspicious of the man who burst in shouting that. But then he remembered who he really was. The Black Leopard Fang. Ah, yes, one of the Demon Lord Carolyn's 3 lycanthropeers. That was right. Carolyn had surrendered to the Demon Lord Milim, and Milim herself had formed an alliance with Lord Rimuru. He was not an enemy, in other words, and so Vaughn welcomed the assistance. Vaughn told him, "Glad to see you. I was just thinking it'd be tough to go on much longer on my own." Phobio answered, "I'll bet." Honestly, I wasn't too sure about my chances solo either. Phobio had reflected on his own attitude, regretting some of his past mistakes, and now he was calmly evaluating his abilities. Thus, he instinctively realized that even if he went all out and animalized himself at full force, he still could not beat Footman. So he put aside his pride and opted to fight together with Vaughn. Footman was powerful, but because he was no longer capable of logical thought, his attacks were striking a monotonous note. It was still enough to gravely wound Vaughn and Phobio, but they were managing to stay on their feet. They could not hope for victory like this, but the word retreat was not in their vocabulary. Their friends, after all, were fighting to the death right next to them. Tyr, the other clown, was engaged with Henrietta, Knight Assassin of Dwargen, with Gabwa and her troops pitching in. They were a small group of elites attempting to capture Tyr all by herself, but something was rather strange with her. Tyr pleaded as she fought. "I'm really sorry about this, okay? I don't like this very much either, but it's an order. I'm trying my best not to kill anyone, so try and do something to stop me, all right?" Her fighting was as lethal as ever, but she sounded very earnest about that. In fact, despite receiving her orders to fight from Kigali, Tyr still retained her own free will. She could not defy the order, but she understood that Kigali was manipulating her mind. She was an unwilling participant, in other words, and she was not volunteering to be here at all. That was why she was trying not to exercise her full force, joining the fight, following the orders to the letter, but still giving Henrietta and the rest the chance to stop her. In response, Henrietta was attempting a capture operation, but despite Tyr trying to go easy, the difference in strength was still too great to overcome, and they had achieved little so far. Tyr called to Phobio as well. "And sorry to you too, okay? I know I took advantage of you before, but I'm not trying to trick you this time." Having Tyr address him enraged Phobio. He and Vaughn realized from an early point that Footman's reason had left him because Tyr wanted to keep anyone from dying. They had not noticed when they first met, but Footman was emitting the same kind of atmosphere as Caroline, someone Phobio respected greatly, and thus he knew he'd never win in a proper fight. So Phobio, for his part, was thankful to Tyr for that. Even so, her next words still set him off. Phobio snapped back. "Shut up! Quit reminding me of my darker hours. You don't need to spell it out. I'm glad you put him in berserker mode for me." Tyr lashed back with blunt innocence. "Right? You guys are so weak. If Footman was serious about this, you'd be dead by now." Tyr sounded so innocent as she said it. She did not mean any malice by it. She believed every word. That was what made Phobio so angry about it. But right now, complaining was about all he could do. Phobio growled, "Impudent little brat." Tyr shot back. "Oh, quiet down, you. Work harder for us then. Be a little more lenient." All he and Vaughn could do right now was just sigh and say in so many words that they would get back at her later. Things remained tough all around. Gabwa, for her part, was trying to find a breakthrough and help out any allies who needed her assistance. That was what made her decide this was the best place to go, but things were never going to be easy. Tira had no interest in fighting, but she could not disobey orders. Gabwa assumed that meant she would be easy to capture, and she was not wrong to think that. The only reason it was not going well was because Tira and Footman were just too strong. The latter could easily break through their metal nets. Nothing half-hearted worked against him, and knocking him unconscious seemed beyond impossible. It took two strong men in Vaughn and Fobio to simply keep him in place. Meanwhile, Henrietta considered herself a speedy fighter, but not even she could keep up with Tira, and Gabwa could not lay a finger on her. She tried casting her net on her, but it seemed unlikely that they would ever capture her alive. Soka and her team might have fared better, but they were too busy fighting Marco. With all that in mind, things were progressively worsening across the field. Gabwa was receiving updates from Moss on their situation. He reported that Veyron and Zonda had set off to bail Gabil out. Things were back to a stalemate, but given the hazards they dealt with, that was little to no comfort. Worst of all was Kondo. Hakuro was defeated, and even King Gazel had met his match. Gabwa heard that Agera and Esprit were on their way to him, but she doubted they could slow Kondo down one bit. Moss told her, "If worst comes to worst, I'll go out." His role was to assess the war situation on behalf of Benimaru, with Gabwa formulating a strategy based on his findings. Even now, her hands full dealing with Tira, Gabwa was still giving a continual stream of instructions, and it was only possible thanks to Moss's support. If he was forced to join the fray as well, the entire front line would collapse in a hurry. Gabwa asked him, "Wait a moment, please. If worst comes to worst, I'll ask you for that, but do you think you could even do anything?" Moss gave her only a vague assurance. "I will do my best." Not even Moss could win then. The thought depressed Gabwa. Moss was a very confident man, one who treated everyone except for a very few, Testarossa chief among them, with supreme arrogance. Now even he was giving vague assurances at best. It only proved how dangerous a foe Kondo was. The lieutenant was difficult to stop. Gabil was not back on the front lines yet. Gabwa's team was a long way from capturing Tira and Footman. All of this made it impossible to disrupt Kigali's ritual. Veldora was there, but he was busy waging a war of words against Velgrynd. If she decided to enter the fray, the moment would spell defeat for them all. Gabwa could not help thinking that now they knew how much they had been relying on Sir Rimuru and Sir Benimaru this whole time. Gabwa had her regrets, but realizing that now would not help matters, that was why she could not afford to give up. She rallied herself with another thought. It was not over yet. The fact that Lady Velgrynd had not acted yet proved that the demons were giving their best effort against her. The difference in strength must be massive, but they were still holding out. Gabwa would never allow her own side to give up before them. She recalled those proud, lofty demonesses. They hated to lose, and even though they were relatively new to Tempest, they had already been appointed to the 12 lordly guardians, among the highest in their government. Their strength was beyond Gabwa's imagination, but when Velgrynd was the opponent, the despair was palpable. The mere fact they were still fighting against her was amazing in itself. Gabwa decided they could not lose to them. Firing herself up further, she resumed her attempted capture of Tyr. On another front, a man stood before Kondo, Agera, dressed casually like a samurai. Esprit bowed out with a shout. "Go ahead, Agera. I won't get in your way." Esprit focused on healing Gazel and Hakuro. Agera just shook his head at her. Esprit was always this way, always carrying on, trying to swoop in to grab the kudos when she could. It was clear she was running from battle because she saw no way to beat Kondo, the quintessential demon, one could say. So Agera paid her no further mind and pointed his sword at Kondo. For 300 years, no one had defeated him in battle. He knew Kondo defeated the great swordsman Hakuro and Gazel, and the thought made his blood boil. Agera addressed Kondo. "You were Kondo? Your skill makes me sigh in admiration. I too live by the way of the sword, and I would be delighted to compete against you." In a no-holds-barred match, Agera knew he could not beat Kondo. Hakuro only managed to land a few choice blows because Kondo kept their battle strictly to sword fighting. Otherwise, even if Gazel and Hakuro took him on at once, they would be quickly dispatched with Kondo not even taking a scratch. That was why he was making this proposal, as desperate as it seemed. But Agera was convinced Kondo would agree to it. That was because he sensed something oddly nostalgic in his swordsmanship. Hakuro interrupted before Kondo could answer.
Lord Agera, so you've mastered the sword after all?
Agera looked quizzically at him. What do you mean, after all?
Well, you do seem to resemble someone I know, you see.
Hakuro stammered a bit as Agera looked quizzically at him. In fact, Hakuro's grandfather and Agera were practically the spitting images of each other. It was not just a matter of their faces. They had the same physique, the same atmosphere, and the same inscrutable mannerisms. Agera answered him with a calm smile. Do I? Well, unfortunately, I do not think we have met before. I have no memory of meeting you since I was born into this world 300 years ago, and I cannot say if I've mastered the sword at all. I have merely resolved to fight with this blade for all of my life. Agera gave him a calm smile. To him, the sword was everything.
I see. Please, don't mind me then.
Hakuro waved him off, stifling the assorted thoughts floating through his head. He had a suspicion Agera was the reincarnation of his grandfather, but he had no solid proof, and if Agera was Byakuya Araki, it was nothing Kondo needed to care about. Hakuro had never beaten his grandfather, but he was still just a human being. No matter what the answer to this riddle was, it would not help turn the tables on this fight. The only way to win was to defeat Kondo through sheer ability. Agera asked about the person Hakuro had mentioned. This other person, Lord Hakuro.
Yes, it was my grandfather.
Hakuro whispered the answer to Agera's puzzled question. Esprit chimed in. By the way, did your grandfather die 300 years ago, Hakuro?
Indeed he did.
Esprit offered a possibility. Then maybe it's possible, I think. He was born as a demon looking just like that, and he was even carrying a sword from the get-go. Lady Carrera has a knack for attracting souls gifted in the martial arts, too. If there was some sort of connection, I wouldn't be surprised at all. Agera wondered aloud. I see. Well, if that's the case, would he perhaps know some secret arts that not even you do, Sir Hakuro?
I'm not sure. I never fully mastered it myself, but among the techniques he showed me, he said that the multi-layered blossom flash was the best.
Now they were striking up a conversation. Hakuro and his cohorts had already done their best, and it was not good enough. So they sat back, ready to watch how this turned out. And even though he knew this was not the time for it, Hakuro was curious about Agera's true identity, and Gazel too was curious about Hakuro's long-lost mentor. Esprit, meanwhile, was healing both of them with a dedication that practically shouted that she really was working. Even Agera had to take his hat off to her. But Agera had other concerns. Kondo was not disturbing their conversation at all, looking fully relaxed as he observed Agera. His job was to eliminate anyone who tried to interfere with Kigali's ritual. He had already picked out the most useful-looking enemies, and he had no intention of killing everybody on the scene. So he decided to attend to Agera, not letting himself panic. He only took serious measures against Gazel because leaving him unattended would have been too dangerous. If a saint equivalent to him had been granted techniques from Hakuro, there was no absolute guarantee he could win. Kondo's job, as a result, was to prioritize winning. In other words, do his job. Against a clearly inferior opponent like Agera, he did not mind playing around a little bit. But this was quite an unusual decision for him to make. He was a rationalist, always devoted to doing the job, and he hated wasting effort on unimportant things. His only weakness in that respect was his pride in the school of swordsmanship he studied under. Kondo knew he was still too naive to let go of his personal feelings, but despite his misgivings, his curiosity still won out. He was just about to say that he would play along, but he was not foolish enough not to keep an eye on his surroundings. Thus, out of the corner of his eye, he saw Velgrynd go on the move. Kigali's forbidden cursed dead birthday was still in progress, but it looked like events were moving along now. Kondo would have to go on the move as well, whether he wanted to or not. Kondo put away his military sword and gave Agira the news. Sorry, I want to take you on, but my work comes first. He could not have been looking down upon the demon more, but even though he knew that, Agira could do nothing to stop him. And as he watched Kondo stride away, he could not help but break out in a cold sweat. Agira muttered in frustration, I suppose I'll live to see another day after all. That was when the battlefield's most dangerous conversation reached its turning point. Veldora was expending a mighty effort fighting alone against Velgrynd. Not that he was fighting at all, however. If he had been, he would have been smashed to pieces in a single blow, no matter how wondrous and state-of-the-art his demon colossus was. He knew his place, and he was not about to try anything so foolish. Instead, he was letting his curiosity guide him as he questioned Velgrynd. Veldora began with praise. Not even I knew until now that the marshal was Lady Velgrynd the Flame Dragon, Sir Veldora's elder sister. No wonder you're such a beauty. That was where his praise of her began. He kept up the flattery, attracting her attention and leading her into further conversation. Velgrynd answered him. I'm sure you didn't know. I've only started to show my face around you recently. She decided to respond to it, and that was bad luck for her, because now she had to keep up her part of the conversation for as long as Veldora willed it. This was the best way he knew to buy time for his side, and plainly it was working brilliantly because Veldora was still alive. Velgrynd, however, had her own agenda. Veldora continued. I see. So you've been supporting His Majesty the Emperor the whole time up to now? Playing the role of so many marshals across so many generations? Veldora could not possibly be more impressed, Velgrynd replied. Yes, well, I'd occasionally go a few centuries without speaking in public, you know? I wouldn't exactly call it anything as difficult as that. Velgrynd was politely holding up her part of the chat, but even she was showing signs of fatigue. This barrage of questions was starting to get on her nerves, and that was why she began to unintentionally complain a bit. Velgrynd told him, But you know, you really are shameless, aren't you? I've been allowing you to pester me with questions because Veldora likes you a lot, but I wasn't expecting quite this many. Veldora answered brightly. Ah, how delighted I am to hear the compliment! Velgrynd corrected him. It wasn't a compliment. Velgrynd looked all but disgusted. For her, crushing Veldora would be an easy task, but she already had 4 separate bodies active, and she hesitated to break out another one just for Veldora's sake. As long as he did not mess around with the ritual, she was more or less all right with all this banter. Even as Velgrynd wondered if she was making a mistake, Veldora was still peppering her with a bunch of lively questions. Veldora asked, By the way, I was wondering, why did Lord Demrata stop me from informing His Majesty of what I knew? If he had an accurate picture of Sir Rimuru's forces, the Imperial army would have suffered far less damage, Velgrynd answered. So? As you've probably realized by now, we don't really care about the Imperial army. We just wanted a war we could use to awaken the stronger among us. Veldora pressed on. Still, though, don't you think it would have been better if I could have discussed it with him? Velgrynd sighed through the answer. You're not going to drop the topic, huh? I'm sure you see it as Demrata betraying you, but he had his own reasons, you know? Veldora said. I see. These reasons, would they have something to do with the child Masayuki? Velgrynd replied. I don't know. Why would I need to know what Demrata was up to? And who's Masayuki? Veldora was puzzled. Huh? Velgrynd's reaction puzzled Veldora. He had expected Masayuki to be the key to all of this. Fearfully, Veldora asked, You're not aware of Masayuki the hero? Velgrynd answered immediately. I told you I wasn't. What, is he strong or something? If this was a yes or no question, no was absolutely the answer. Veldora did not dislike Masayuki. He kind of enjoyed his spunk, in fact, but he knew there was no way you could ever describe him as strong. Velgrynd snickered at his response. Well, Kondo, you know, he's only interested in people who're likely to awaken. Besides, if he's going around styling himself as a hero, perhaps Veldora assumed the Demon Lords would take care of him soon enough anyway. This sounded valid to Veldora. Yuki was using Masayuki to gauge the Demon Lord Rimuru's reaction, upon Damrata's advice, no doubt. That meant the upper echelons of the Empire must have known all about Masayuki, and yet Velgrynd claimed to have no knowledge of him. Yes, it was certainly plausible that they ignored him because of his obvious wimpiness. Kondo, at least, would immediately judge Masayuki as worthless to him. He was always eager to nip any uncertainty in the bud before it posed a problem, and if Masayuki was really a dead ringer for Emperor Veldora, it would not be surprising that he would try to get rid of him. That much was understandable, but what about Damrata's moves then? Ghidorah asked. But Sir Damrata had assigned 2 single digits to protect young Masayuki, you know. Velgrynd replied. So we could infiltrate the land of monsters, I presume? Ghidorah faltered. No, well, yes, but... Ghidorah faltered, feeling a bit frustrated. This sounded reasonable to him, but at the same time, something did not seem quite right. Despite betraying the Empire, he was letting himself be troubled by things that should not have bothered him. He wanted to yell at Velgrynd to treat his questions more seriously. Velgrynd noticed. You seem dissatisfied with that answer. Ghidorah hurried to deny it. Oh, no, absolutely not. He tried desperately to assuage her, wondering how she could see into his state of mind when she could not even see his face. Then he realized exactly why something seemed off with what Velgrynd was saying. Ghidorah blurted it out. Sir Damrata truly is a traitor, isn't he? The words just fell out of his mouth. Velgrynd answered dryly, Oh, don't be silly. You're the traitor here. She had a point, but Ghidorah was undaunted. Willing himself to be even more shameless than before, he spoke to Velgrynd some more. Ghidorah asked, Well, let me ask you a question. This boy Masayuki looks exactly like His Majesty the Emperor. What do you think about that? It was that piece of information that made him uncomfortable. It was natural for the Empire to care a lot about whether someone was strong or weak, but you could not talk about Masayuki at all without mentioning that he looked like Emperor Veldora, their leader. Kondo might have known about this, although Bernie and Jiwoo probably did not. Damrata, Veldora's friend, definitely did. So why would he want them protecting Masayuki? That was what made Ghidorah wonder. Velgrynd's voice changed. Pardon me? Ghidorah tried to explain. That is to say, the way Emperor Veldora and Masayuki look exactly alike. Why wasn't that information relayed to you? Ghidorah cut himself off, face turning pale. The expression on Velgrynd's face made him quake in his boots. Now he regretted speaking out of turn so much. Ghidorah had the sudden thought that he might be dead. But Velgrynd just ignored him and began thinking things over. It was hard to believe Kondo did not know this piece of information, but if so, why did he not tell her or anyone else about it? And Damrata was even worse. She had no idea what he was thinking, and Ghidorah's question could no longer be ignored, and for that matter, just how physically alike were the two. Velgrynd decided she would have to see for herself sometime if Masayuki really looked exactly like Veldora. Everything had been going to plan, she thought, except for that slight miscalculation where the entire Imperial army got annihilated. But somehow, this seemingly inconsequential piece of information was getting under her skin. Velgrynd told him, Well, Ghidorah, thank you for the useful tip. I'll be willing to let you off the hook in exchange, but what do you think? Are you still going to challenge me with that toy? Velgrynd had no intention of killing Ghidorah that day. Despite it all, he was one of the few friends of Veldora whom Veldora really trusted, and while he had undeniably betrayed the Empire, she did not feel he had ever betrayed Veldora. To Velgrynd, the Empire itself did not mean very much, and thus Ghidorah's betrayal was perfectly acceptable. This Ghidorah understood was where she differed from a lot of people, and even he had trouble wrapping his mind around it. So he decided that he had no choice but to accept Velgrynd's proposal. He was buying time with this banter because he knew he could not win anyway. If an actual battle ever broke out, that would be the end of the operation right there. Ghidorah, in essence, would not last even 1 second against her. Ghidorah hid his answer in laughter. Oh, no need to joke with me. I know perfectly well that I am no match for you. He hid his qualms in laughter, deciding that a defiant tone was important here. The answer might have been disguised as a denial, but it was neither a yes nor a no. That was left to his conversation partner to decipher, and no one from Rimuru's camp could accuse him of desertion afterward either. It was the perfect move, Ghidorah's wit at its sharpest. Velgrynd could see through all of that slyness. but she still thought it was pretty entertaining of him. With a sigh, she muttered that it was so like him and opted to let him go. Besides, luckily for Veldora, the situation had changed. The alternate Velgrynd who was fighting Veldora had gone into all-out warfare, so her attention was needed elsewhere. Velgrynd teased him. "Oh no? Well, if you ever feel like it, let me know. I'll be happy to take it on. But before that, do your best to survive this war, all right?" Veldora stared after her. "Huh?" Velgrynd continued. "I have some business to attend to, so I'm going to leave this area to another pawn of mine. I don't think the military ever liked you very much, but best of luck becoming a saint while you're here, okay?" Veldora tried to ask, "What do you mean?" Ignoring Vedora's attempt at a question, Velgrynd floated into the air. Having to interrupt her magic flow here would cause serious delays to the ritual, but that much was unavoidable. Veldora, helplessly left behind, was stunned as he looked up at her. This turn of events bewildered him. He had no idea what to do next. In any battlefield, you could not afford to relax for a single moment. And as if to prove the point, the meaning of Velgrynd's words became clear before Veldora had an answer. Velgrynd invoked the art, Dimensional Connection. The scene was so far removed from reality it boggled Vedora's mind. As soon as the levitating Velgrynd shouted it, the space around him contorted and warped, and from the hole in the air a vast number of airships coursed out. Veldora stared in disbelief. "Is that the fleet of airships carrying the magical beast division?" "No. You don't mean that you've connected space itself? That's impossible. Do you have any idea how far away they were?" "Wait, no, that's not even the issue." Veldora was thoroughly confused. It was that hard to believe just what was happening before his eyes. Ignoring all laws of time and space, the airship fleet that was meant to attack Anglacia from the north was now summoned over here. Rimuru estimated that they were at least 3 days away, and Veldora knew they could not possibly have been summoned. Magical teleportation was fraught with danger. Any failure could kill hundreds of soldiers, and preventing that required complex incantations and mountains of magic force. Veldora tried to reason it out. With Sir Rimuru, it could be possible, could it not? But if you were summoning someone in a different location from yourself, the difficulty level jumped up by orders of magnitude. It was simply impossible to do such a thing. It transcended the bounds of all common sense. Veldora was absolutely correct, but he had great difficulty accepting it as reality. If Veldora was flummoxed by what he saw, the other side of the equation was even more confused. The airship fleet advancing toward northern Anglacia was enjoying an elegant journey in the air. The sky, unlike the dangerous sea route, was perfectly safe. Very few monsters could reach their high altitude, although there were still some. This was a fleet of some 300 airships, and they were commanded by their leader, Major General Zamdo. His mission was to transport Imperial troops, the 30,000-strong Magical Beast Division commanded by Gradim, toward the central continent. They would not be fighting themselves, so they could not ask for an easier mission. But aboard Zamdo's flagship, a vessel more luxurious than the other ships, one section was enveloped in an eerie atmosphere. Zamdo had been informed that a very important official would be inspecting the ship, but nobody told him who this person was. The news came quite suddenly, to the point that Commander Caligulo might not have known either. Still, Zamdo was unconcerned. Better to be left in the dark, he thought. Excessive prying would do little but shorten your life. So he went about his duties, managing to keep himself fully relaxed. But then he received an urgent message. A communications officer burst onto the bridge. "Excuse me, sir." The officer had an ominous look on his face. The fact that he personally reported here instead of sending a soldier over indicated this was something important. Zamdo asked, "What is it? A message from the homeland?" They had already received word that Caligulo had been handed a painful defeat. Most of the ground forces were already lost, but that was not any of Zamdo's business. Once an operation was underway, nothing would stop it unless he was ordered to halt. The battle was just a few days away, and it was not like panicking would allow Zamdo to call anything off. To tell the truth, however, Zamdo was internally hoping an order to stand down would come at once. He had not told any soldiers about the ground losses, but if word got out, it could gravely affect morale and the success rate of their operation. Better to pull back and start over than take that risk, he thought. But since some would take that as a sign of weakness, Zamdo could not make the call on his own. Gradim, commander of the forces they were transporting, was not the type of person Zamdo was good at dealing with. That was why Zamdo was hoping against hope that this was an order to stand down. Instead, it was nothing like he ever imagined. The communications officer reported, The marshal is coming. Zamdo shouted back. What? He shouted in no small part because he did not even know the marshal was on board. So that was the VIP he had been told about. Ridiculous. Was this operation truly that important? It was important, yes, but it was just one of the Empire's 3 major military divisions on the move. There should not be any need for the marshal to be involved. But enough about that. He had to figure out how to greet this guest. Zamdo barked the order. All rise to welcome the marshal. Zamdo, regaining his composure quickly, shouted out the order. A pulse of tension coursed across the bridge. Everyone stood upright to give a salute, and then the door opened to reveal Velgrynd, one of the world's most stunning beauties. Everyone on the bridge was immediately astounded. The marshal, this figure none of them had ever laid eyes upon before, was standing right in front of them. But before this fact even registered in their minds, Velgrynd's beauty mesmerized them. But she took that for granted. Velgrynd told them, "Don't just stand there, you silly people. Get back to work." Her voice was gentle. She knew she had to be careful. Velgrynd was a rational woman, and she knew that resorting to any kind of violence here could destroy the flagship in an instant. Emperor Veldora himself, in his main non-separate body, was aboard the airship as well, and she needed to take that into consideration. It was a stroke of luck for everyone around here. Zamdo relayed the order. "Be seated. All hands, back to work." Zamdo's orders set the officers back to their duties. The elegant pleasure cruise was over. From that point on, Zamdo was in for a series of surprises. Zamdo introduced himself. "It's a pleasure to make your acquaintance, Your Excellency. My name is Zamdo, and I am proud to serve you," Velgrynd answered. "Oh? Well, hopefully you'll survive this then," Zamdo replied. "It would be a great honor. I will do my best to live up to your words." Velgrynd moved on. "Yes, I'd like to give you a pep talk, but I'm short on time. Let's get down to business." Velgrynd sat down on the captain's seat, paying no attention to Zamdo's brown-nosing. She promptly gave an order to Zamdo, who hurriedly got to his feet. Velgrynd ordered, "Call Commander Gradim in here. I don't want to have to keep explaining matters over and over." Zamdo answered. "Right away." Zamdo glanced at an officer. He immediately set up a visual link to the ship Gradim was aboard. Within a few minutes, Gradim was on the display. Gradim greeted Velgrynd with flattery. "Heavens, you are even more beautiful than I thought." At first sight of Velgrynd, Gradim thought that she looked remarkably easy to handle in a fight, so he could not help but wonder why a woman like this was said to be stronger than he was. Her body was supple and soft, no excess fat or muscle at all. Strength was not the kind of aura she emitted. Some people, he thought, were of the belief that magical power and fighting spirit were the most important things, but you still needed a strong body to leverage that to its full extent. A strong body like his own, he thought, proud of himself. That was why Velgrynd looked so weak to him, the textbook jock attitude. Velgrynd, meanwhile, had little interest in thinking deeply about Gradim. His strength, at least, was the real thing, and she wanted to use him to the fullest as a helpful pawn. Velgrynd laid out her orders. "I don't need your flattery. As of this moment, our current operation is cancelled. Your new mission is to take control of the armed nation of Dwargun. That is all. Any questions?" Finally, both Zamdo and Gradim thought at once. The fact that the order had been delayed so long indicated that, as expected, their nation was facing unprecedented turmoil back home. If they suffered a major defeat, they would have to quickly review their strategy. This was a simultaneous 3-front operation, so every decision they made would take on great significance. A single failure could bring the whole thing crashing down. However, after several days had passed, and with the kingdom of Englacia lying just beyond, they now had orders to stop. It was only natural that the two men would be dismayed. Zamdo accepted the order. "Very well. In that case, let's return at maximum battle speed, Gradim answered with arrogance. If it is your command, I, Gradim, will risk my life to undertake it. But do be aware that I will be asking questions later about this operation's failure, as well as the delay in your new orders. Zamdo was clearly nervous. Gradim was just arrogant. Being on another vessel, he could not pick up on Velgrind's sheer supremacy through the screen. His response put Zamdo on edge. Zamdo inwardly begged not to be dragged into this. But Velgrynd did not care. She smiled and said, "It seems that you are suffering from a misconception," Gradim asked. "A misconception?" Then he pressed further. "What do you mean by that? You think you're blameless here?" Velgrynd nodded. "First of all, Zamdo, I will take you from here to your destination. Once we're there, I'll explain what to do, so be ready." Zamdo was bewildered. "Pardon?" Velgrynd continued. Next, Gradim. There was no failure in this operation. In fact, this is exactly what we've been planning to do from the beginning. Gradim snapped. "Don't be stupid. You think you can escape responsibility like that, this late in the game?" Velgrynd's voice cooled. "Stupid, you say?" Velgrynd stared at Gradim with narrowed eyes, displeased. What a pain, she thought. She wondered for a moment what to do about it, but concluded that it would be better to let sleeping dogs lie. Gradim was certainly strong, but from her point of view, he was not an enemy. He could easily be crushed, but it would be a waste to do so. And most of all, there was no time to lose. It was a tremendous stroke of luck for Gradim. Velgrynd let it pass. "Well, whatever. If you survive, we can discuss this matter later," Gradim started to ask. "What are you saying?" Velgrynd cut through the interruption. "Let me talk, please. Right now, I'm going to perform a dimensional connection, so prepare to move quickly once I'm done. After that, I will need to concentrate on Veldora. I'm glad to see that boy's grown to be better than I thought, but handling him is going to be a bit tricky. So I want all of you to focus on dominating the battlefield on my behalf. I've identified several promising people among the enemy, and I want them captured alive if at all possible. Am I clear?" Ignoring Gradim, who was about to raise another protest, Velgrynd got straight down to business. Once she had her say, she turned her back on them, then placed her hand on the reinforced door leading to the outer deck of the airship. Zamdo panicked. "Your Excellency! What are you doing? It's dangerous! Please come back at once!" Velgrynd gave him a withering glance. "What? I just explained it to you. If I don't go outside, I can't perform the dimensional connection." Giving Zamdo a glance that indicated just how stupid she thought he was, she opened the door without hesitation. Then she flew into the sky. Zamdo was horrified. Of all the selfish things, were they just collateral damage to her? Opening that bulkhead while flying at high altitude and speed was unbelievably dangerous. If not done properly, the difference in atmospheric pressure could suck out everyone on the ship. The ship's crew were enhanced soldiers who had all undergone extensive surgery to strengthen themselves, but Zamdo, as a scientist, was just an ordinary man. The low outdoor temperature would weaken him, and the lack of oxygen could even kill him. The same was also true for the magic conjurers under his command. Thus, he was in a hurry to close the door as soon as possible. But his fears were unfounded. Velgrynd had cast Dominate Space to prevent any impact on the airship. But before Zamdo could demonstrate any surprise, an even greater shock struck him and all of his staff. With a snap of the fingers, Velgrynd floated into the sky. And the next moment, Velgrynd invoked the impossible. Dimensional connection! A huge distortion in space appeared in front of her. One officer breathed, "No." Another reported in disbelief, I can't believe it. Spatial oscillation detected. It seems that our local space-time continuum is being affected by a gigantic, powerful fluctuation of magicules. A third voice cried, "It can't be. Was that the work of the Marshal?" It truly was ridiculous. After all, this was a phenomenon beyond all human imagination and knowledge. No one could understand what was happening, and no one would ever be able to pull that off themselves, so they all tried to ignore the reality before them. But then Zamdo realized something. That boy. The Marshal had referred to Veldora as that boy. There were only a few entities he knew of that could get away with calling him that. Zamdo's thoughts raced. No. Could this woman really be? The guardian dragon of the Empire, a presence too awe-inspiring to even mention by name. Zamdo had thought that the Empire was blessed with her protection, but now he realized that was not the case. As if to confirm the thought, Velgryn's smile deepened as she floated in the sky. Velgrynd commanded them, "Now, go. Go and make yourselves useful to me." Her voice was unyielding. Zamdo, and even Gradim, lured by the sound of her sweet voice, turned the bows of their airships toward the rift in space.
Route confirmed. The next episode and full playlist are ready.
Then don't stop here. Keep watching in story order and subscribe before the next part drops.